Now, if I do that, it's going to just paint in whatever color I have here. So I'm going to back that up for a minute. So there's a couple different things that you can do. Either you can paint directly on the layer, okay, and choose from your uh, different blending modes here to get a variety of different effects. Okay, and typically I would say you can go with things like multiply, and it just depends. Sometimes depending on the color, you'll get some different effects. Hue, you can see, gives you sort of an interesting effect there. It just kind of changes that color. And you can do overlay, and just depending on what color that you're going with and what effect, sometimes you'll need to just vary this up a bit and see which one works the best. So in this case, what I'm going to actually be using in this case is I'm going to switch to color. Now, color is the most common one that you probably end up using just because it typically will tint whatever's underneath it fairly well, and it will keep the colors very similar to whatever you chose initially, so you can see this color and that being applied to the skin. Now, if you want a more opaque look to that, you could, however, go ahead and you could try duplicating the layer. In some cases that works. In this case, because color isn't that effective, it's going to get slightly darker, but it's not going to give us the right look we want. So we could actually make another layer and start painting a more opaque layer on top of that, and then use the opacity to vary that a little bit. So that's one technique, way of doing it. I'm going to go ahead and delete both of those and click on new layer. Now, another way you can actually do this, I'm going to bring the brush size down a little bit with my bracket. And what you could do is use the blending modes that are up here. So as you're actually painting, you'll see that blending mode actually happening in real time. Okay, so we could change this to, let's go ahead and do overlay, and I'm going to actually paint this directly on top of this layer here. And you can see that it paints it in with the effect of the blending mode in real time. Okay, so you'll want to make sure that you have the right blending mode already set. You could do something like hue, and we're going to go ahead and paint that in. And you can see in this case I'm actually painting it on this other layer here, and so when you do that, you're not going to get the same effect. So what you would want to do is go ahead and switch back to this layer, and then you'll notice that it starts to work. So always make sure that you're checking your layers, which layer that you're on, that you're not on the other layers, and if you are, just go ahead and delete them. So in this case, we're just going to paint this in. Okay, and you can see that with hue, I like the hue because you can actually paint directly on top of the eyelash because it's black and it's not going to affect that. It's really only going to affect the lighter part. So I could come through here again, start painting this. And this is just a really subtle effect. Now, I'm using a really soft brush. I'm up here. I've got a diameter of 30 and the hardness I have 0. So it's all soft edges. Now, if you want a little bit of a harder effect around the edges, you could do so. You could just bring the hardness up, and that would allow you to get a much harder edge, maybe like on the edge of the eye, in case you're applying something like, let's say you're going to put like a darker line underneath the eye. You could actually switch to this darker brown here, and we could switch and go with a much darker color and paint that in. I'm going to bring this down a little bit. You can see it still has sort of that greenish effect. Okay, so if you don't like the way that looks, again, you can just switch to something like color. And you got to remember that this is a blending mode. It's a transparent layer, and so you got to keep in mind, how is that going to look against the skin tone? Okay, because remember, these are blending modes, and they're blending with the color or the values that are underneath. So if it's a light or dark, that's going to affect it too. So there's a variety of things that could affect those colors because this looks, really dark. However, on the skin, because it's so transparent, it doesn't look exactly the same. So you could even change the opacity. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and actually back that up a little bit because I'm going to switch this to a new layer, and I'm going to switch my brush back to the soft brush, and I'm going to bring this up just a little bit, and again you can see the difference how dark that is. So again, it's not going to damage anything. I could simply just scroll through my blending modes and find the one that I like the most, and then I could vary the opacity and so on. So in this case, the soft light is going to work. It's a little closer to that color, so even if I wanted to add a little bit of a darker effect right along the lash line there, I could do that. Bring that just a little bit smaller. Bring that right along there just to sort of pop that out a little bit. Okay, and we could continue painting this with some of those other colors. We could come over here. I could go ahead and sample this green again and just go to the brush. And you can paint multiple layers, just depending on the effect that you want to do. So you could actually switch this back to normal, and you can see how that almost erases it, right? So it's a good idea to go through here and change. You can even change your blending mode. Look at how the different colors, just by changing, having a blending mode here, which is soft light, and color burn over here, it actually starts to turn it into a purplish color, which I'm not going to use right now. But you can see here that you can get a variety of different effects by having multiple blending modes overlaid on top of one another. Okay. Right now I'm actually using soft light